Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is another exclusive story from the wonderful mind of Edward Ed Smith. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled I Will Never Go Bow Fishing Again Without My Gun. Let's get straight into that. Bow fishing is a great sport. It encompasses skill, strength, patience, and above all, relaxation. And okay, I'm talking about country living and being outdoors. It is also a way to control nuisance and invasive species of fish. Usually the bounty of the day is taken to the woods and placed so that the local wildlife is supported and keeps the predators and scavengers from the livestock and chicken coops. Some equate this with irresponsible wildlife management, but we see it as a win-win for all. In Oklahoma, we harvest alligator gar 1 per day per license holder, Asian carp as many as you can, and a flathead mud catfish 5 per day per license holder. My cousin Gary, his little brother, Trace and me, I'm Ray, and the three of us went in on this Gator Trax 24 foot, 70 inch wide shallow water boat with a bow fishing deck on the front and a modified poling platform at the back, powered by a Mercury 115 horsepower 4-stroke outboard motor, which was cradled by a powered transform jack and a 15-foot Minn Kota shallow water anchor, and pulled by a Minn Kota trolling motor. The hull of the boats was ringed by 70 to 80 watt LED floodlights, all powered by 2000 watt super quiet generator. A perfect getaway from the family and wife, a power yacht on trailer for some good old boys needing a break. While this thing was being fabricated, Gary already had a kick-ass bow for hunting, but he wanted a new bow because he didn't want to modify his hunting bow back and forth for fishing. Now, it was a fight to get his wife to go along with the whole idea, and after several intense discussions and at least one night staying in my guest room above my garage, he got the approval, and it only took a new dishwasher and a KitchenAid mixer to get the boss lady to approve, but he did it. And so, all three of us took a trip to Pat's Archery and Outdoors in Okmulgee, and all three of us being like brothers, we all had to have the same thing. Yeah, it's a country thing, but it works. So there we were, with our new out-of-the-box Cajun sucker punch bows, reels and arrows. Now, those might have cost us almost 2 weeks' pay, but when you're ready to run out the door with your hair on fire after a long winter, and your kids have drove you to the complete distraction, and we all know the wives are ready to kick us to the woodpile anyway, it's just time to go. We had several excursions with the new boat and had a hell of a good time last year, but this was the first time we had the boat out of this season. With work and kids' school stuff and the Little League, this and that, well, this was the time. It was the Friday a week before the big Memorial Day weekend in 2017. Trace had wanted to go to Oolagar Lake, and so we decided that we would pull in at the Double Creek Coves Park Road boat ramp. It's located at the intersection of Park Road and East 240 Road in the northern part of the lake. In addition to the boat ramp, there is an RV and a fifth wheel hookups, and an all-terrain vehicle or ATV trails and a park ranger station. As well, but not primitive, a primitive camp is available. And the access point is remote, but just enough amenities to make it comfortable. We got started late, but we wanted to get here a little before dark. But as it was, we were launching the boat in the dark. The boat left the trailer as soon as it could, and Gary started the old Mercury and let it begin its warm-up. Trace drove his truck up the ramp with the trailer and parked it, and I caught the boat as Gary nudged it to the shore. We had it all ready, boat, fuel, food and a few beers. I won't lie, but they're pretty strict about it on this lake, so we didn't advertise it. The temp gauge on the motor said, ready to roll. Trace came running down to the shore and said, all right, boys, let's boogie." And he jumped and hurdled around onto the upper deck. I pushed the boat off and hopped up onto the lower deck and stepped over and up onto the upper deck railing. "Boys, it's time to fish, relax, eat and recharge," I said. Gary switched on the front light bar and double-checked to make sure that our navigational lights were on and we were off, moving about 25 miles per hour. The area had about 7 inches of rain about a week ago, and the lake was up about 18 feet past the power pool. So there was floating debris in the water, of which we had to maneuver around several big floating logs. And our boat was metal with a double hull, but who wants to take that chance in that boat? And trust me, no one wants to be in the water at night. Gary had laid our course into the Garmin GPS map Lakeview that we had to take to get into the Eastern Spur Channel. And you see, a spur channel is created when a lake begins flooding into its tail waters. They usually start out as a slough or large ditch that gets flooded when the lake is filled. And for us, it's good fishing, bow or wet line. And this spur is pretty remote. It starts out over 300 feet wide and then narrows to a little more than 60 feet across. To the west of this spur is marsh, swamp and dense woodlands until you reach the Verdigris River over 1.5 miles away, and to the east is more marsh, swamp and dense woods, lots of farmland and heavily wooded tributary courses for more than 4 miles. And there was no moon this night, just stars and high clouds, and if it wasn't for the light bar on the front, I would have been driving into total darkness. And we hardly said a word on the way over to the spur. It was just a hell of a night to enjoy the lake, the night and the sound of the engine. The boat is equipped with 17 powerful floodlights, but those are all angled down to the water, so we can see the fish that we're firing our arrows at. When we get to the shallow water, the plan was to motor into the channel and shut down the main engine, and drop the trolling motor and move up to a troll along the eastern bank until we get to the first small tributary on the east bank, and then return from our turnaround point, which is 6.4 miles away. What we didn't know was the trip was going to be far longer and terrorizing than we ever could have imagined. As we moved into the mouth of the spur, a true sense of our remoteness set in. As the tree line started coming into view of the light bar's array of lights, and we could see the bank to bank, dark greens, browns and black shades. Someone might have called it spooky. As for me, I'm just seeing woods. And Gary said, "Okay, we're in the channel." And there were dead trees standing in the water, and they did cast some crazy shadows on the woodline. And to the east, as Gary turned the boat to the east in order to keep us in the channel, which is the deepest part of that spur, and would allow us to continue using the main engine. The west bank was closest to us, about 90 feet, and because of the channel's position, and the east bank was still over 200 feet away. Dense wood lines lined the bank of the spur, and the banks were getting closer as the spur narrowed. The west bank was about 75 feet from us, and the east bank another 100 feet from us. The light bar was really starting to light up the spur's banks, and we could see a little bit more detail in the trees and bushes that lined the banks. And these were littered with fallen trees and brush from seasons past. To our east, we observed a small tributary that was draining into the spur. This tributary was more like a ditch that was about 4 feet wide and had maybe 2 feet of water in it, and this was probably a runoff ditch from the big ponds off to the east of the spur. As we passed the ditch, Trace said, "Hey guys, can we back up and take a look down that ditch? I thought I see some movement down the ditch." I said, "Maybe a deer?" Gary turned to the boat while keeping it on the channel and cruised back to the ditch. Trace grabbed the spotlight and pointed it at the ditch. A large splash and rustling of the trees and bushes began. "What is it?" Gary asked. Trace then said, "I think it was a hog." I said, "I didn't see anything, but whatever it was big." But nothing else was seen, and so we continued down the spur heading north and travelling around the bend back to the west. Once we came back to a straight portion of the spur, I narrowed the boat again with about 70 feet on each side of us. Gary said, "Hey, do you guys want to try along here?" "Well, how deep is it here?" said Trace. Gary looked at the GPS fish finder panel and said, "That's about 35 feet to the channel, but it shallows quickly to about 4 feet and 20 feet off the bank." Then I said, "Let's do this." Gary pulled the throttle back, and we were barely moving as we came into the bank at about 20 feet away. Gary turned the boat parallel to the bank and moved the throttle to neutral, killed the motor and raised the hydraulic transform up a full 9 inches and fully tilled the motor out of the water. And Gary said, "Trace, you're on, dude." Trace stepped up onto the platform on the front third of the boat, lifted the trolling motor and slid forward and dropped into the water and locked into place. He flipped the power toggle switch on the front power panel and then put his foot onto the control pedal. He felt the power of the trolling motor move the boat. "Well, we're up, boys." "Hey, how about some lights, buddy?" Trace said. Gary flipped the generator start switch and the lights turned green. He felt the vibration a little, but nothing else. The indicator light was green, and so it was working. He started flipping the front lights on, then the side angles, and then the side lights, and the glow was slowly growing. And then he flipped on the rear lights, and the one light that pointed directly behind them. The glow was complete, and they could see the bottom of the spur. And there was plenty of fish. We just needed to make sure we were taking the non-game fish, of which we were allowed to take, and the alligator gar, and we were all looking for that next big gar that will break the state record of 8 feet, 287 pounds. And under the regulation, each of us could take a gar. Of course, we would have to find one, or 3. Gary climbed up onto the polling platform and sat in a mounted chair. It swiveled in a 360-degree angle. The polling platform is about 5 feet above the bow platform, and so Gary has the commanding view. Trace is the man in charge of the trolling motor and is also the navigator now. I'm the gopher and the extra set of hands. Gary claimed his first prize, a big head carp, and he tossed it into one of the 55-gallon plastic barrels we had on the boat. And we were all getting our share of the non-game fish as Trace manoeuvred up the spur and around the S-bend in the channel, and the spur narrowed once again. We were fishing off to the east bank at about 12 feet, and the west bank was some 70 feet away with the spur narrowing. And we now had to be concerned with dead falls in the channel and shallows. As we moved out of the bend, Gary shouted, "Hey, what's that?" as he was standing up on the polling platform, pointing up the east bank. I looked, but didn't see anything. Trace turned back to Gary and said, "What? I didn't see anything." "It was there on the bank. It looked like it was on 2 legs, Gary said, stupefied. "Maybe it was another fisherman," I said. "Not likely. We're in the middle of nowhere, man," Trace added. Trace continued to move us towards the area that Gary had pointed out. We took a few more fish, and as we got paralleled with the area, Gary pointed the 1 million candle power spotlight at the area. He saw nothing, but with the density of the brushes, the briars, and the trees, we really couldn't see all that far. The dirt on the bank was disturbed, but there was nothing that he would get excited about. "Guys, I feel like we shouldn't be here. This place is giving me the heebie-jeebies," Trace said while stepping onto the trolling motor pedal. We moved down the bank, and now even I got a weird feeling, like we were being watched. But I didn't want to say anything, because the guys would really beat me up over it. Gary stayed silent. He looked at me, and I could tell he was kind of scared. I relit my cigar, puffed hard a couple of times, and then the smoke drifted onto the bank and into the bushes that were almost on the edge of the water. And I swear, what we heard sounded like the loudest, largest sneeze that I know I've ever heard. Trace then asked, with a sense of fear, Did I just hear what I thought I heard?" And Gary and I in unison said, "Yep," as we remained with our eyes locked onto the brush. Trace wasn't paying attention as the boat's right side started dragging onto the bottom of the creek bank, and we were within 8 feet of the bank. "Get us off this bank and get to the channel. Get to the goddamn channel," Gary said in a state of fear. Gary had the spotlight pointed at something on the bank, moving behind the bushes, and now Gary, who is a rock, nothing phases him. He was shaking and now yelling at Trace, God damn it, Trace! Get this thing moving! Trace was still transfixed on whatever Gary was tracking with the light. Gary grabbed an almost full beer can and threw it at Trace, hitting him in the right shoulder, and the beer went everywhere and splashed all over me. Damn it, Trace! Move this boat! Trace then smashed the trolling motor pedal, and the boat began to move quickly back to the depths of the channel. But in this location, we were only about 35 feet away from the east bank. Hey Trace, Gary barked. Yo, Trace said. I need you to hug the west bank and get us some distance from that bank, Gary said with command in his voice and pointing at the east bank. What the fuck did you see, Gary? What was you shining the light on? I said, frustrated. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Gary said with a seriousness in his voice. I don't know, try me. After all, I just heard Paul Bunyan sneeze from the bush in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma, I said in a smart-ass fashion. Okay, those bushes, they're about 8, maybe 9 feet tall. Guys, I saw some kind of head poking up and out from the other side of those bushes. All I could see were his eyes and teeth, Gary said in fear. Guys, let's just keep moving. Let's get up north of Highway 60 bridge, Trace said. As the boat moved quietly through the water, it seemed to Gary that something sounded like it was moving on the west bank, and as he swung the spotlight over to the direction of the sound of the brush popping and splashes in the water as the light fell on a female deer, probably only about 3 feet off the west bank in shallow water. As she trotted slowly in the direction we were travelling, and she kept looking back into the bushes on the bank as she snorted and sprang. Then, for about another 70 feet, she then jumped back onto the west bank and stood there, looking onto the bank. Well, that puzzled me. She never once looked at us. We were sitting here on a good ship lollipop, lit up like Las Vegas strip club, and not one glance. She took several steps along the bank, and then the bushes moved and she started to jump towards the channel when a hand, a large hand that resembled a raccoon's, but only this one had claws, reached out of the bushes and grabbed the deer by the rear haunches and started dragging her back onto the bank. She was baying her distress calls, and she was kicking and attempting to crawl back into the water with her front legs, when she suddenly disappeared into the bushes. A few seconds later, we heard bones cracking over her screams, a loud snap, and she was silent. For a second, we ourselves were silent, and then Gary yelled, "Get the trolling motor up! Get it up, Trace!" as Gary jumped off the poling platform and landed behind the console. "Keep watching that wood line! Keep your eyes open, boys!" Gary jammed the hydraulic transform button to the full down position, and the pump whirled, and then he tilted the engine back to the vertical and in full water. He switched the front light bar back on, and it blazed and lit up the spur bank to the bank, and the engine roared to life. Trace pulled the kickback rope on the trolling motor, and it slammed back into its position and locked in its bracket. "It's up, Gary!" Trace yelled over his shoulder. About 2 minutes later, lit up like the spaceship coming in for a landing, we were coming into view of the Highway 60 bridge. As we were still moving through the bend, the light bar caught motion on the east bank. It was tall, maybe 10 feet tall, with black bristly hair. Its chest was thick and it was muscular throughout its body. And while it walked on 2 legs, it had an odd gait. The head was covered in hair. It did seem to have a snout, and the eyes were fiery in the light of the blazing bar. And for just a second, it seemed to have raised its ears. They looked pointed, and there was a lot of teeth as it opened up its mouth wide. It started running at full speed, and then it jumped and was headed straight for the boat. Gary swerved the boat very close to the west bank, throwing a 3-foot wake wave up onto the bank. As the beast landed in a large splash just 15 feet from the boat. I looked at Gary, and he was in full panic. He jammed the throttle up, and our speed increased to 55 miles per hour. We were quickly approaching to the bridge. He lined us up to go through the centre, in between the pylons, as we were getting closer. Trace was yelling something and pointing at the abutment of the bridge. One of those things, it was coming down the slope of large stones that lined the abutment, It was looking at us, closing in on the bridge. It sprang from the abutment and landed in the centre of the channel, where it stood up, and its chest, shoulders and head were just above the water. And then, with its long arms reaching out, it was ready for us to come to it. I grabbed the wooden oar and Gary yelled, "Hold on! Hold on! It's gonna be close!" We heard it roar as we sped towards it, and just at the last possible moment, Gary swerved left, and as we passed that fucking thing, I swung like I used to when I played baseball in high school. The flat of the oar smacked the thing in the face across its snout. It flew back in the water and went under, and Gary screamed, "I can't get back to the centre. We're going through the left. Oh, Jesus, this is going to be close." We rocketed towards the space between the pylon and the boulder abutment. We passed within 2 feet of the concrete pylons, moving at about 60 miles per hour. As we cleared the bridge, Gary manoeuvred us back to the centre of the channel, and I saw large logs floating past us. I crawled up to the console and said, "Gary, he's back. He's back, Gary." And he didn't respond. "Gary, he's back, Bubba." I put my left hand on his right hand that was resting on the throttle. He finally made eye contact with me, and I said, He's back, Gary. You're gonna kill us if you don't." And while patting his hand, he pulled back on the throttle, and we slowed to about 25 miles per hour. Trace was still lying on his stomach, with his head down and his hands on top of it. I crawled up to the bow platform and asked Trace if he was okay, and he said, "Are we still alive?" I answered to him, "Yeah, we are, and you're still stupid." We reached the main Verdigris River channel, and we turned south, and Gary was now more settled. He felt that it was safe enough to increase our speed from 25 to 35 miles per hour, and we were all in shock. We just looked at each other. The best we could do was breathe heavy at each other. As we passed under the Highway 60 bridge that spans the main channel, we thought about what happened when we went underneath the bridge just 3/4 of a mile to the east of our current position. It was close to 3 a.m. and we were feeling it. As we were getting ready to pass through the hairpin bend in the main channel, Gary pulled back on the throttle and we slowed down to a crawl, and he said, "Boys, we got a problem. We're not going to have enough fuel to get back to the ramp. I have been looking at the fuel gauges and our fuel consumption and the GPS. We just don't have enough to get back." I said, "I think I can help you with that." I opened up one of the dry wells and pulled out both 5-gallon fuel cans that I'd stashed before we left. "Will this help?" "Yeah, I think so," Gary said, relieved, as I filled the fuel tanks and the gauges reacted. "We should have enough, just barely." Gary was just about to throttle up when, from the east bank of the main channel, one of those things busted out of the tree line and stood there looking at us. We were well over 120 feet away when it started to emit a screaming howl with a growl underneath the howl. It made this sound which I will never forget. It shook my intestines. Gary jammed the throttle and our speed climbed to 55 miles per hour. We flew around the bend as our engine roared past the beast, and I lost sight of it. That thing cut across marsh, swamp, ponds, and at least one other slough to get here just to scream at us, I said to myself as a shiver ran down my spine. Later, I would realize that it wasn't just to scream at us, it was a warning. After about 5 minutes, I asked Gary to throttle back, because we would run out of fuel before we get back to the ramp. He did as I asked, and we entered the north tail waters of Ulaga Lake. Gary made for his waypoint 4, and that put us on a return course back to the ramp. The motor died about 1/4 of a mile from the ramp, and Trace took us into the ramp with the trolling motor, and with the generator running on its last drops of fuel. The trolling motor had all the power it needed to get us to the ramp. We trailered the boat and lit out of there, just as fast as Trace's truck could, get 3 old country boys back home. We didn't say anything until we were all back into Tulsa. As we turned onto the Creek Turnpike headed south, passing a small town by the name of New Tulsa, Trace said, "I think we should keep this to ourselves. I don't want anyone to know what I've seen. Gary said absolutely nothing during the entire trip back home. I said, I agree. No one's gonna believe us. I'm not sure I believe it. Then, 3 days later, Gary came over to my house and Trace was already there, picking up some plywood that I was giving him. We was out in the backyard near my barn, and I said, Hey Gary, how are you doing? And Trace said, Hey Bubba. And Gary went straight to the point. Boys, I want you guys to buy out my part of the boat. We gave him a shocked look. After the other night, I'm never going out to the lake at night again. Boys, I'm done. That was the closest I've ever been to dying. And I've had nightmares for the last 3 days. As he walked off and got into his truck and left, Trace and I just looked at each other with amazement. I'm sure everyone is wondering why I'm telling you this story. Well, my wife and kids are at their grandparents visiting, and I'm here at the farm by myself. Just this afternoon, I saw one of those things in the tree line across from my barn. It's now 10:30 p.m. and the thing is in my house. It's been trying to bust down the basement door for the past hour. I'm writing this on my laptop. I have my shotgun next to me, but it's probably not going to do any good. These things, they are vicious monsters, and I know my death is going to be gruesome. But somebody has to know. I ran across your website the other day, and based on what I read on your site, I think what I saw that night on the lake and what is in my house is now a dogman. That is what is about to break down my basement door. I'm now emailing this to World Bigfoot Radio and Dead Man Talking. Hopefully this helps someone. Please, please, find out what these things are, because I'm not sure if it's going to stop with... Email ends. Wow. Awesome short story there from the wonderful Edward Ed Smith. I believe this was his first attempt at writing before, of course, heading on to do the Googway Siege of Red Oak, Oklahoma series that you've all loved and heard. Of course, as ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR? Just to let you guys know, I looked into the back end, sort of boring aspect of the analytics of YouTube. Noted only 23% of you have got your notifications bell sent to all notifications. So whenever I post a community post, possibly even videos, you won't get that notification unless you've got all notifications sent. And so if you want to keep up to date with all community and video posts as and when they come out, you need to set that bell to all notifications, and then that should keep you all up to date as and when I post anything. As ever guys, much love and respect, and I hope you're all well, and above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.